I'm Jamie from Must Be Tuesday. Recently I started volunteering at the local Pride Center. Every 2 weeks they have a jam out where youth can come and play instruments and learn music skills in the evenings. And one of the leaders each time does a little mini lesson. And one of the ones that I did was about songwriting, specifically about how I wrote the song The Gripping Story of a New Vampire. And I thought that I would share that with you. Basically, this song started with the lyrics. Actually, it started with one line. One day I was listening to music. I don't even remember what song I was listening to, but I misheard a line. I thought it said, but I wouldn't call it good. And I started to think about what that could mean and what context it could be in. So it occurred to me that you could say it's been quite the morning, but I wouldn't call it good. And that sounded to me like a really Joss Whedon kind of thing to say, like something somebody might say on Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So then I started thinking about vampires, and I thought, what if a vampire was pulling himself out of their grave, and someone who happens to be there is really scared, and all they can think to say is good morning, and the vampire's like, well, it's been quite the morning, but I wouldn't call it good. But then I had to think about why someone would be hanging around a graveyard, and if it's morning, why is the vampire not bursting into flame? So then I thought they should probably be one of those Twilight vampires that just sparkles in the sunlight. So that became a line in the song too. One thing I do when I'm writing lyrics that I want to rhyme is I come up with the second line or the punch line first, and then come up with a rhyme for it to go before that. So in this case, I wanted the last line of the verse to end with, but I wouldn't call it good. So the line I put before it was, you didn't run, you didn't scream the way you probably should. So that way we have a rhyme and we end with the little punchline. And I did a similar thing with a bunch of the other verses. Oh, and the reason I decided that the other person was there was that they work at the graveyard. They're just doing their job. And then I thought about what pronouns I should use for these characters. I didn't really want to give either of them a gender, so I thought it would be easiest if I do I and you rather than he or she or whatever. So that way the listener can just sort of assume whatever genders they want for the characters. And in the end, I think it made it more personal as well, because you can listen to it as if it's being sung to you. Then I had to come up with why this story is being explained to the listener. If they were there, they should already know. So I decided that vampires lose their memory when they're turned. And that made it a lot easier to tell the story, because if that's the case, then that happens to the narrator at the beginning of the story, and it also happens to the listener, which is explained at the end of the story, and it makes a nice little cycle. And it also frees me up from having to come up with a lot of backstory about who the narrator was before and who turned him into a vampire, so it made things a lot easier for me that way. So like I said, I came up with the lyrics first, and I made them all rhyming sets of 4 lines, with punchlines at the ends and rhymes before that. And then I had to come up with a melody and some chords. I have this issue where I can never remember melodies. I have a terrible head for melodies. And in a way that's kind of a good thing, because when I come up with one melody and I make like a recording of it on my phone, then the next day I could come up with, I don't remember it, so it's not in my head, and I could come up with a totally new melody and record that, and then listen back to both of them and just pick whichever one I like better. But this melody actually changed quite a lot as I wrote the chords, because I had a lot of trouble coming up with chords that sounded good together, that worked with whatever melodies I was working with, and that were appropriately dramatic for the vampire story, that I could actually play on the guitar. I don't actually know that many chords on the guitar, not like I do with piano. So I wanted to keep it simple but also interesting sounding. And at first I was playing it a lot lower. I didn't have a capo at first, and it was really deep, and I was just sort of strumming. And there are 2 ways that I use in this song to play the chord D major. One way, the lower way, is to mute the top two strings with my pinky and do this one. And the other one is to only strum the top four strings like this, and it's a lot higher pitched. So, and I switch between those. I switch between those because I feel like the different sound is appropriate at different times. But anyway, I decided it would be more folky sounding if I finger pick instead of strumming. So then I did this. But then the melody that I liked to go with it, I couldn't actually sing that low. So I ended up capoing it higher and higher and higher until it was something I could sing along with. And I did, for a while I was still strumming it up here. But I liked the finger picking a lot better. And then as I went along, I wanted it to be loud sometimes, and so I started playing it more messily, like this. And I thought that would be a good thing for like an in-between verses sort of segment, because it's hard to sing and play like that at the same time, at least it is for me. Some people will tell you when you're writing lyrics that you need to have a consistent melody from verse to verse. There should be exactly the same number of syllables in every single verse. If you've got a one-syllable rhyme at the end of some lines, it should always be a one-syllable rhyme, so it's consistent. But I don't follow those rules. And I think the rules are kind of changing. Like, for example, if you're writing a Broadway musical, you used to have to keep things really consistent that way to make it easier on the listener. If they know what kind of melody is coming up and it's always the same melody, and they know how many syllables are going to be in the line, and they can predict that, and they know how many syllables are in a rhyme and they can predict that, it makes it a lot easier to guess what the rhyme is going to be at the end of the line, and then to understand the lyrics that you're listening to. And this used to be important because when people used to go to Broadway shows, it might be the only time they ever hear those songs. They weren't like listening to it ahead of time. They had to hear it for the first time and understand everything right away. But now that's not really an issue. You can just buy the soundtrack, listen to it over and over, read the lyrics online, and then you can basically have the whole show memorized before you even go to see it. So like, for example, with Hamilton, tons of people heard the soundtrack before they ever saw the show. And so, which is important because those lyrics go by really fast. They are rapping at incredible speeds in Hamilton. So, so it's important that people are able to listen and read and understand the story before the first time they ever go to see the show. So basically, I'm sort of going with that new philosophy of like, if people hear this song, it's not going to be the only time they ever hear the song. They can always read the lyrics, and it's fine. So I don't feel like I need to have the exact same melody every verse, the exact same number of syllables every verse. And sometimes I have one-syllable rhymes like should and good, and sometimes I have two-syllable rhymes like power and hour, and that's totally okay. Another thing I did was I was thinking about whether to have a chorus in this song, and I actually. So it ended up being such a ballad with a little story going through the whole thing, and it ended up being kind of long. And I thought if I added a chorus to it, it would make it so long that no one would sit through it. And and I couldn't think of anything to sort of sum things up that would be a good chorus to have that would stay consistently relevant from the first verse to the last verse. So I ended up just repeating the last line of every verse, the gripping story of a new vampire. Which ended up being a really fun double meaning, because at first you think it's the story of the narrator vampire, but actually it's the story of the listener vampire. Yeah, so one thing I did while I was writing lyrics was I just came up with lots and lots of rhymes for vampire, and I ended up using dire, desire, sire, liar, fire, desire again, and choir. I thought of phrases that would go with those words, like preaching to the choir, and then extended those to full lines, and then all of those lines became the second to last line of every verse. Sometimes I use a way different number of syllables in a particular line from one verse to another. As an example, in verse 1, I didn't have a lot of syllables going on in the second line, so I had a pause before the second line even starts, and I even have a little pause in the middle of the line. So I go, "You were there and staring when I rose from the dead. Oh my Lord, good morning, was all you said." Whereas on the second verse, before I start that second line, I start singing the line before beat 1 comes up. So like verse 1 I go, "Oh my Lord," on beat 1, but on verse 2 I go, "So I asked you why," and so there isn't really room for a pause there. So like the first 2 lines of verse 2 are, "It was strange and charming how you seemed to simply trust, so I asked you why the sun didn't turn me to dust." So you can see that I don't have a pause before line 2, and I don't have a pause in the middle of the line either. And that's totally a thing you can do when you're writing your own songs, is you can sort of change the melody from one verse to another. You can have a different number of syllables as long as it still fits in such a way that you can sing it clearly without rushing. Even though I was saying that people can just read the lyrics along with it, it still doesn't sound good if you're rushing. People will be able to understand you better, but also you'll have enough breath to get through it. And if you're rushing with your singing, you'll be more likely to rush with your playing and make mistakes. So it's just a lot easier if you've got the right number of beats in your melody to go with your song. But like I say, you can have pauses sometimes and not other times, and it can make it more interesting to listen to as well. So that's how I wrote the song The Gripping Story of a New Vampire. I'm going to put a link in the description to where you can listen to the complete song. I hope you like it. Please leave a comment or any questions that you might have. I'm going to try and be really a lot more consistent this year with putting up new content. So hopefully I'll have a whole bunch more videos coming out soon. And I will see you then. Thank you. Bye.